Hey everybody, welcome to the Evening Reader. My name is Priscilla. How's everybody doing today? Hope you're having a nice weekend so far. Had kind of an interesting convergence of events this week. The first one was that I got my book order, not all of it, but a little bit of my book order from Better World Books that I placed when we got back from the States. And I got one of the books I ordered and I picked it up and started reading it on Wednesday. And that's this book, Unfinished Business, Notes of a Chronic Rereader by Vivian Gornick. And this is a series of essays where Gornick talks about books that she has loved and reread throughout her life and what they have meant to her as a chronic rereader. And I finished it this morning, and I will talk more about it in my wrap-up video for May next week. But yeah, this was really, really good. But in a coincidence, Sean D. Standfast posted a video a couple of days ago, I think. Maybe it was Thursday or maybe it was yesterday, Friday. That was the top 10 novels that his top 10 rereads, his top 10 most reread novels, I guess it is. And so I thought that it would be fun, because I myself am a chronic rereader, which is why I got this, to talk about my top 10 most reread novels. I love to reread books. If I had my choice, I probably would spend more time rereading books than reading new books. But, especially between since blogging, I had started a blog back in 2009, and I was sporadic with it, but definitely fell out of the habit of rereading. And then now, with YouTube, I think we all are sort of inundated with new books, new to us books, events, projects, wanting to get to books that we have always meant to get to, but we haven't yet, so that we can talk about them with you out there. Rereading seems like something that could get to be farther and farther away, but I used to probably spend more time rereading books that I had and loved than I did reading new books. Yeah, that's kind of weird to think about. Partially, I think that's because of school and being a student. You're reading for school, and then when you're not reading for school, you're like want to just read something that you know and love. But I really kind of continued that even into early adulthood, and I get stuck. I would get stuck on books, and I still do that. I would get stuck on an album. I can get stuck on a book, and then that's the book I want to read all the time. Like I just want to go back and reread it again. Other books just don't satisfy me. Anyway, so I thought that I would talk about some of the books that have been really important to me, and I'm not gonna stop and review the books or go into any real depth with them. If there's any book that looks interesting that you want me to do a longer video on, I would be happy to do that. So if you want to let me know in the comments down below, that would be great. I will be probably featuring some of these authors because of the really cool, I don't know if you'd call it a series, but the Accidental Authors it's not really a tag that Daniel from Guilty Feet put together, and I will link his original video on that below because I've got one of those coming up on one of these authors later in the week. So all right, without further ado, let's get started. So the first book on my list, and this is probably my favorite book of all time, and I read it for the first time maybe when I was 11 or 12. But before I read the book, I saw the movie, and that is True Grit by Charles Portis. And when I say I saw the movie, I don't mean I was 12 in 2009. Oh no, I was. I'm talking about the, I don't even know the year, I'll have to look, late 60s, I think, version with John Wayne and Haley Mills, which is a really wonderful movie, actually. And I'm not a huge John Wayne fan, but he's very good as Rooster Cogburn. And I loved that movie so much. I don't know how many times I saw it. It must have been on either cable or PBS, but I remember watching it many times, several times, and then, of course, renting it. And so, oh, yeah, I read the book, I checked it out of the library. Um, this is not my original copy. I got this as a used copy later on in live, and just love it. And I have a new copy also. Both versions of the film are really fantastic. Both do a really good job, but they're very different films. But I highly, highly recommend reading the book. It is told in the first person by Maddie Ross, and she is looking back at the events as she does in the Coen Brothers film. They kind of are faithful to that, and she is, you know, a young girl who has her father is killed by an outlaw named Tom Chaney, and she goes out to, she wants to hire somebody to avenge her father's death. Um, and oh my goodness, it is just fantastic. So she meets up with Rooster Cogburn, and then they also join forces with LaBeouf, and they go after the outlaw Tom Chaney. And if you've seen the movie, it's really wonderful. But oh, the singular voice, Maddie's voice, is so fantastic in this book. And it's amazing to me that Charles Portis was able to give voice to a young girl in that way. That's just so true and clear. So, probably favorite book of all time. So wonderful, so true. Grit is probably my most reread book of forever. The next book on my list, and then we'll fast forward to like college, um, is Franny and Zoe. And I love J.D. Salinger. The first book of J.D. Salinger's that I read was Catcher in the Rye. I read that when I was 13. I still have my crappy paperback copy like this of that. But I reread that a lot as a teenager, when I was in high school and first in college. But then when I got into college, I read Franny and Zoe for the first time, and then that became my go-to reread book. Just if Franny and Zoe are brother and sister. Franny is the sister, Zoe is the brother, and they are part of the Glass family. So that makes up a family of characters who feature in a lot of Salinger's work. The Franny and Zoe are the youngest of the Glass children, and Franny is having sort of a, not a breakdown, but a crisis of conscience, maybe. I'm not really sure. But, you know, just she's definitely going through, the world is a mess, everything is fake, what am I doing, what's real? And Zooey has been called to come and talk some sense into her by their mother, Mrs. Glass, and her wonderful bathrobe pockets full of crap. Which is a long list of that in here. I think this is one of those books that you read it at a certain time in your life and you really identify with it, and then maybe when you're older you go back and go, oh, that seems kind of silly, but I still think that it is a really touching book about a certain time of life. And also it has one of my favorite, I just love this opening passage. This is not the very first part of the opening passage, but this scene on the train platform I just particularly love, and it's this: Lane lit himself a cigarette as the train pulled in. Then, like so many people who, perhaps, ought to be issued only a very probational pass to meet trains, he tried to empty his face of all expression that might quite simply, perhaps even beautifully, reveal how he felt about the arriving person. Franny was among the first of the girls to get off the train, from a car at the far northern end of the platform. Lane spotted her immediately, and despite whatever it was he was trying to do with his face, his arm that shot up into the air was the whole truth. It still just kills me. I love that. So I have a new copy as well. So Franny and Zoe. and the back are the same. Okay. All right. So then the next book after that, that was, which I've already talked about several times here on the channel, is The Secret History, which I read in 1992. Everybody on BookTube knows this book. I don't need to talk about what it's about. I'm sorry about the reflection. I'll try to hold it like this. But yeah, this was one of those books that I read it in 92 and probably and then I read it like in December of 92 and then probably in 1993. I probably read it 4 or 5 times and then a couple times a year for 10 years after that. I'm not even exaggerating. If I didn't read it in whole, I read it in part, probably the first half, because I really think the first 2/3 of this book are almost perfect, and then the last third of this book is it does kind of unravel. But especially the first part is just fantastic. So yeah, The Secret History. Not gonna belabor the point there. The next book, I'm trying to kind of go in a chronological order, but yeah. So the next book is the first Margaret Atwood book that I ever read, which is Cat's Eye. And a friend of mine, or actually a professor that I worked for, loaned it to me and said, you know, I think that you will really love this book. And I did. I was really wowed by it right away. This is the supermarket, mass market paperback version. I just recently got a brand new version because I plan to reread it. And because this one's falling apart. But yeah, I will read. So this is Returning to the City of Her Youth for a retrospective of her art. Controversial painter Elaine Risley is engulfed by vivid images of the past. Strongest of all is the figure of Cordelia, leader of the trio of girls who initiated her into the fierce politics of childhood and its secret world of friendship, longing, and betrayal. Elaine must come to terms with her own identity as a daughter, a lover, an artist, and a woman, but above all, she must seek to release from Cordelia's haunting memory. You know, I cannot speak for other women, I can't speak for other people, but certainly for me, this book had a lot of resonance in terms of it was one of the first books that I read that dealt with female friendship and the reality of what it meant to be a little girl and not be, and that little girls are not sugar and spice and everything nice. And that in fact they can be quite brutal, they can be quite vicious, but that also women or girls can have strange bonds even with their tormentors. I guess that happens for boys and bullies too, and bullying, but that's basically what this is a story of. It's a story of somebody who is essentially, you know, bullied and sort of tormented by somebody who then later becomes her best friend, but still just has a weird sort of magical hold on her and her view of life. It's fantastically written. I still think that it's Margaret Atwood's best book. I mean, she's obviously most famous for Handmaid's Tale, and she's written dozens and dozens of books since then. But I tend to like her earlier novels, and this one is my favorite of hers. Yeah, so okay. Next. I'm not sure which one of these I read next, or read first, because I think, well, let's see. This is the problem with stacking up books, right? The Stone Diaries by Carol Shields. Oh, I've got that reflection in my glasses again. This is a really wonderful, wonderful novel. So I know that there is the Carol Shields Prize for Fiction. So I see her talked about on BookTube a lot. And that prize started in 2020. But the funny thing is, I've never seen anybody actually review a Carol Shields book on BookTube. And now, to be fair, I haven't done a search, so maybe people have. But she is one of Canada's, you know, most revered and probably famous writers, up there with Alice Munro and Margaret Atwood. And they were contemporary. they were contemporaries. Carol Shields died in 2003, so that's why I'm saying were. And this novel is really interesting. So this, yeah, did I say this won the Pulitzer in 1995? It was actually published in Canada, I think, in 1993, and then published in the United States and Great Britain, and then won the Pulitzer in 95. And this is the story, the life story of a woman named Daisy Goodwill Flett. And it is really fascinating biographical treatment of a character where she is not really present in her own story. It's her story through other people's stories. So through her parents, through her closest friend, through her daughter, through letters, correspondence, through newspaper articles, and just sort of the bits and just the flotsam and different stories that make up her biography, but are not actually from her or her point of view, and maybe not even who she thinks that she is herself. So it goes all the way from her birth to her death, and it's really fascinating. I'm going to talk about Carol Shields in my first accidental authors video later this week, so I will go into more depth about that in there, but this is definitely worth picking up. And yeah, I think I read this in like 1996, 1997, and I've reread it many times since then, probably 6, 7, 8 times. Yeah. I really love Carol Shields. Okay. Next up on the docket is, like I said, I'm kind of trying to go in chronological order. Straight Man by Richard Russo. Not Rousseau, not the philosopher, but Richard Russo. And this is currently a TV series called Lucky Hank, starring Bob Odenkirk. And I'm not sure, I haven't seen the series. I probably will try to watch it at some point. Hopefully it will make its way over to Netflix or HBO Max, and I can see it. And this is it's a campus novel. It's I will just read the back. So it says, in this uproarious new novel, because it was 1997, I think, Richard Russo performs his characteristic high-wire walk between hilarity and heartbreak. Russo's protagonist is William Henry Devereux, the reluctant chairman of the English department of a badly underfunded college in the Pennsylvania Rust Belt. Devereux's reluctance is partly rooted in his character, he is a born anarchist, and partly in the fact that his department is more savagely divided than the Balkans. In the course of a single week, Devereux will have his nose mangled by an angry colleague, imagine his wife is having an affair with the dean, wonder if a curvaceous adjunct is trying to seduce him with peach pits, and threaten to execute a goose on local television. All this while coming to terms with his philandering father, the dereliction of his youthful promise, and the ominous failure of certain vital bodily functions. Now, this book is hilarious, and, you know, I get that there's something about this book where, yes, it is a man having a midlife crisis that everybody's feels like they're over, they're done with, but I would say if you haven't read Richard Russo, you've got to give this one a chance. It is set in the 90s. It's not today's world. It meant a lot to me because at the time I read this, was, thinking I was going to have an academic career. I was in the academic life. I found some of the insights and nuances into academic life really hilarious. And also, Russo just is really good at, not having people act from stereotypical motives. Hank Devereux is at his core, actually a really good, solid guy. He just is like any of us, he just is. He's not sure he's not sure about his career. His father drives him crazy. His mother drives him crazy. He absolutely loves his wife and would never want to lose her. He's worried about his daughter, yada yada yada. But he's a very, very real person. So this is not your typical, this guy's gonna, have an affair with a co-ed and buy a sports car and run off or whatever you might be worried about. I highly recommend it. I don't know why they changed the name of the series to Lucky Hank from Straight Man. I guess they were thinking it was going to have some other implications, this title, but Russo is referring to the very traditional use of straight man in comedy, where the straight man is the person who delivers the line that then allows the person, the funny person, to deliver the hilarious line back. That's what straight man means, and that's what it means here. So this is a really wonderful book, and I just love Rich Russo. So we could talk about him another time. Okay, moving on. Next, Plainsong. Plainsong by Kent Haruf. And this was up for the National Book Award. I think this was published in 2002 or 2003. And let's see, it says, ambitious but never seeming so, Kent Haruf reveals a whole community as he interweaves the stories of a pregnant high school girl, a lonely teacher, a pair of boys abandoned by their mother, and a couple of crusty bachelor farmers. From simple elements, Haruf achieves a novel of wisdom and grace, a narrative that builds in strength and feeling until, as in a choral chant, the voices in the book surround, transport, and lift the reader off the ground. And it truly is just a beautiful book. Essentially, it's multi-point of view. It's not linked stories, though. It follows an arc, and really the characters at the heart of the book is Victoria Robideau, who is the pregnant teenager, and then the two bachelor farmers whose unfortunately whose names the McPherrons. And this is the first book in sort of a trilogy that then is followed by the book Eventide and then the book Benediction, and they are all set in the fictional town of Holt, Colorado. Kent Haruf is a fantastic author. He's one of my very favorite authors. I've read everything he's written, and he just writes with so much beauty and so much heart. I highly recommend this, and I will probably do a video just dedicated to Kent Haruf, because maybe like a favorite authors series. I don't know. This is a lovely book. It's a quiet book, and yeah, okay. I won't go on because I said I wouldn't go on, and I've still got a few other books to cover. So what is up next is no, that's not it. Actually, this one should have been before Plainsong, but we'll talk about this one now. High Fidelity by Nick Hornby. Oh, I love this book so much. Maybe you've seen the movie with John Cusack. If you have, the movie's very well done. And Hornby was involved in the movie and making sure that it got translated from the UK to America, and that it still worked. And there's really no difference. There's not much difference between the stories, except some of the songs referenced are a little bit different, and obviously the setting is different. This is in London, and that's set in Chicago. But this is just, Nick Hornby. I love Nick Hornby, and he's one of those authors. For example, I love his column in The Believer where he talks about what he's reading. I have those essays have been also collected in books, and I have all of those books. But his fiction, I do love his fiction. And High Fidelity is, the story of a man whose girlfriend breaks up with him, and he owns a record store. He's, obsessed with music. Music's probably one of the loves of his life. But she, says, you're immature, you're foolish, I'm leaving you, I can't do this anymore. And so he decides to go back and reconnect with the last 5 women who he had relationships with, and find out what happened, to see if it's him and to see what's wrong. So yeah, this is just a wonderful book. It's very, very funny and very, very touching. So High Fidelity. I have read this probably, I don't know, 8 or 9 times. Yeah, 8 or 9 seems to be a big number with me, doesn't it? Okay, Olive Kittredge. Olive Kittredge. Uh, I think this is probably another one of those books that a lot of people have read. I don't know, I haven't seen really it much on YouTube, but I think a lot of other but people are talking about other things that Elizabeth Strout has written, so there really is no need to necessarily go back to Olive Kittredge. This is a novel in linked stories. Olive Kittredge is sort of the central character. In a way, she's also sort of a central conceit. They are in the town of Crosby, Maine, which is a fictional town. That's where Olive lives with her husband Henry and then her son Chris. And this kind of goes back and forth in time from early days. It starts with a story that's actually focused on Olive's husband Henry, and then it goes through a series of stories where Olive is sometimes a main character, and sometimes she's not even in the story at all. But when it ends, she's much older. She's probably like in her early 70s, and things have happened, and she's sort of found herself alone and in her life, and maybe starting sort of a new life. Olive's a character who is not always likable. She's kind of tough, but she's also kind of funny. I didn't really realize how much humor is actually in this book until I had read it a couple of times, and then I started to see some of the slyness and some of the wryness in this book. But it's so wonderful. Olive Kittredge and then Olive again. It's sort of the sequel, another set of connected stories that follow Olive then into her 70s and beyond. Um, and it's just really wonderful. I particularly love novels and linked stories. Oh, you know what I'm going to say? Probably I'll do a video about that someday. Okay. All right, Olive Kittredge. And then my final book is of my top 10 is The Animators by Kayla Raye Whitaker. I already talked about this book in the book covers video. I think I'll just do a short review video on this anyway. But this is about Sharon Kisses and Mel Vaught, who are partners. They're creative partners. They're best friends. They make animated films together. It is a love story. It's a love story about friendship. It's a love story about the love of creating something and making art. It's just a really, really wonderful book, and I highly recommend it. And yeah, I've talked about it, so I'm not going to talk about it again because I have a couple other things that I want to get to here, which are my 3 honorable mentions. And these are all short story collections. And I just want to say, I'm not going to go into all of them, but I read story collections, like not collected works, not collected stories, although those can be very interesting to read straight through, also very informative. But I read short story collections like I would read a novel. I sit down and I read all the stories. I don't read other books. I don't just dip in. I don't skip stories. I read straight through. And so these are the 3 that I've probably reread the most in my life. And this one is probably number 1. Hateship, Friendship, Courtship, Loveship, Marriage by Alice Munro. Alice Munro, who won the Nobel Prize, I believe, in 2011, and is just fantastic. She's only ever written 1 novel. She mainly writes short stories. She mainly published those stories in the New Yorker. They call her, the North American Chekhov. I think that's probably true. I find her more accessible than Chekhov personally. maybe it's just because of her material and because, being a North American. She's Canadian. She's from Ontario. But this is just a fantastic book. And this is the book that has the story, The Bear Came Over the Mountain, which Sarah Polley made. I don't think it was her directorial debut, but she made a beautiful movie of that story. And I think it's called Close to Her is the name of the movie, if I'm not mistaken. I'll put a title there. The next one is Birds of America by Lorrie Moore. I love Lorrie Moore. I probably could have held up either Birds of America. I could have held up Like Life. I could have held up Self-Help. I also could have held up her little novella, Who Will Run the Frog Hospital. I've read all of those, all of them at least 10 times. I told you I was a chronic rereader. I was not kidding. Um, but these are wonderful stories. This has her, probably her most famous short story, People Like That Are the Only People Here, which is a story about parents who have a child in the cancer ward. And a very touching story. But the thing I love about Lorrie Moore is her quirky humor. She's got a very distinct sense of humor and a very distinct style. And she's probably one of the only writers I've seen write in second person where it actually works. So, so there's that. Um, yeah, but I highly recommend this book. Highly recommend Lorrie Moore, who has a new novel coming out, and Sonia has an advanced copy, and I think she's read it, and oh, I'm so jealous, and I can't wait to hear what she thinks. I hope it's good. We can talk about that another time. And then the last one is this, What We Talk About When We Talk About Love by Raymond Carver. Um, just a wonderful collection of short stories. Old Saint Raye. uh, he's probably like, I guess, Steve Donna, what Steve Donahue would call dude bro. He's like a literary dude bro when it comes to short stories and minimalism, and people are still trying to write like Raymond Carver. It sort of took over MFA workshops everywhere, especially like in the 80s and the 90s. The funny thing is that, in particular with this collection, which is just fantastic, you know, he writes about the struggles of ordinary blue collar people, usually in the Pacific Northwest, and just these are raw sort of insights into their lives, very touching. But the funny thing is that the stories in this book, I think, are the versions that were edited by Gordon Lish, and this is sort of a famous thing that Gordon Lish was at the New Yorker at the time, and he really, really heavily edited Carver's work, so that that's how his minimalist style came about. Really, Carver went back later and restored the versions of these stories, and they are not as minimalist as Lish made them. So it's kind of a famous case of who made the work, the editor or the writer. You can read both versions. There's all of these are still in print, and then you can get the collected stories, and they have the other versions in there as well. But yeah, I don't know even how many times I read this collection. It was just, at the time, for a long time I wanted to write short stories, and I'm not very talented at short stories, and I still try to write them occasionally, but uh, you know, this was like a Bible back then. So I read it many, many times, and I would still love to go back and read it, although I probably haven't read it in, oh, I don't know, maybe 15 years. So, yeah. All right. So that's it. Wow, that was long enough. So tell me, if you like, what are your top 10? Do you reread? Do you reread books? And then if you do, what have you reread most often? What is your favorite book to reread? Do you reread every year, or are there books that you just reread at different periods you've reread over your life? I would love to know. I would love to hear about it down in the comments. And yeah, I guess that's it for me today. Thank you for hanging out with me. And if you liked this, please hit the like button. If you're new and you're not subscribed, I'd love it if you subscribed and you would come hang out with me again. If not, that's okay too. Booktube's a big place. I'm the one with the reflection always in her glasses, so you know how to find me. But I hope that you have a good weekend out there, and take care, and I will see you soon. Bye.